Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak in support of the Liquor and Gaming Red Tape Reduction and Other Legislation Amendment Bill of 2013. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the changes proposed by these amendments. If there's one thing that Labor have done well, it's to leave us a wonderful legacy of red tape. The changes proposed by this legislation frees up community and volunteer groups, and that's important. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to just talk a little bit about a typical committee meeting with a volunteer group or a school P&C, because my wife and I over the years have been to many, and typically they end up like this. I think we might do something to raise a little money for the school or for the charity or our sporting group. How about we put on a bit of a do? We organise a few eskies with some beer and some wine, and we run a bit of a raffle, and then somebody goes, but hang on a sec, I think that there could be some problems with that. We might have to go and get some permits, or we don't know what the public liability insurance is, and they go, well, okay, we'll do something simpler. Maybe we'll run a trivia night, or we'll put a bit of a dinner dance on, or we'll just run some sort of big raffle or something at the school. And then, of course, the conversation ends up, well, we're probably going to need a community liquor permit, whatever that is. We're going to have to organise designated drinking areas. We've got to find out how to go and get this permit. Who's going to pay for the permit, because we haven't got any money in the account at the moment. And it just goes on and on and on. And then I've heard, from the opposition today talking about the need for, security risk assessments. And then, of course, then there's just... That is, it's absolute. I take that interjection from the member for Gregory, and that's exactly what Labor do, is they just load us up with more and more layers of red tape, more rules, more regulation, more layers than a Sara Lee pastry. And it's these layers that are making it more and more difficult. I'm showing my age, I know. Sara Lee pastries and those ads were a few years ago now, but layer upon layer upon layer. But it's making it hard. And I can tell you, from my experience, trying to find volunteers on a committee, trying to get people organised to sort of help out with a fundraiser or a fete, it's getting harder because people are frustrated with all the rules and all the regulations. And I've seen it all in the last decade, I can assure you. Earlier this evening we heard the member for Mulgrave using terms like safeguards and proper designations. And then she spoke about the need to protect children at these community events. And look, there's some valid concerns there, but look, I for one, I'm tired of Labor's nanny state view of the world, because under Labor we've become more and more regulated. That's right. Labor's approach to community and volunteers has typically been, we'll shoot first, ask questions later. Their approach has always been that presumption of guilt. Let's focus on what could go wrong. Let's focus on systems and process and how we can control all these things. The approach has always been about assuming the worst. Let's create as many rules as we can, let's cover every possible risk, let's use all means possible to control, and when we've done everything we can to demoralise well-meaning, hard-working volunteers with as much needless paperwork and regulation as you possibly can, then they want to bring in some more rules. And who knows, had the previous reign of Labor continued, we probably would have seen them regulating family gatherings in our backyards, parks and beaches. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased we're stripping away these onerous red tape burdens and the imposition of each of them. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I can speak with a little authority in this respect because my wife and I have personally been confronted with these on many occasions through our involvement at the school P&C and some of the local charities that we've been involved with. And it's these sorts of rules that create, that really just suck the life out of enthusiastic, well-meaning volunteers and community groups. And I've heard many parents on many occasions say, look, it's all too hard, I really just don't need this much grief in my life, I can't be bothered. And so you end up with the same 2 or 3 battle-hardened, battle-weary people on P&Fs and all these other committees and sporting groups carrying the load because they're persistent and tenacious. But why do we have to make it so hard for people to get on with these things? I wanted to talk just a little this evening on a more positive note about the great work of the Gold Coast Community Fund. Back in the late 90s, I was approached in a former career as a radio station manager to join with a whole bunch of other business people and community people and we decided that we'd create an approach that would get around some of this unnecessary red tape, and that is that we went out and got a master permit. We created a particular art union process that lots and lots of groups could get involved in, and over the years I'm proud to say that the Gold Coast Community Fund, as an umbrella organisation, has helped many, many groups on the Gold Coast. Over the past 10 years they've raised and given away some $1.5 million to individual groups on the Gold Coast. Groups like the Writing School for the Disabled, Paradise Kids, AEIOU, Hopewell Hospice, Act for Kids, Rosie's, the Gold Coast Project for Homeless Youth, the Musgrave Hill Early Childhood Development Unit, and then they've provided personal support for many families and individuals in financial and practical terms for their children with cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism and many other families connected with the Southport Special School. And I want to pay tribute to some of these people, because these are some of the people that actually said, well, even though Labor are making it really difficult for us, we're going to persist. And so we had one of the best lawyers on the Gold Coast volunteer his time, and he's been the chairman of that board now for the last 7 or 8 years, Mr Simon Bennett from OMB Solicitors. And Ian Cousins, who was the vice chairman right from the start some 10 years ago, used to work for Macquarie Radio, and he continues to be on the board of the Gold Coast Community Foundation. People like Steve Cavalier and Rutland Smith from Harvey Norman, who've donated every year the major prize that's enabled this fund to get out there and raise the dollars. John Applegate, John and Susie Kinsell from Surface Ink Spot have printed the tickets and make sure they met the permit requirements and had the right numbering and the right colour code and the right font size. And I mean, the regulation in this space has just been ridiculous. But I want to pay tribute to all the people on that committee. Roy Miller, the former Managing Director of the Gold Coast Bulletin, Joe Condon, I take that interjection from the member for Mermaid, Joe Condon, who's the dual Vice Chairman, Troy Niebling, the Treasurer of the Fund, Kate McFarlane, who's been the Secretary for many years, Michael Thorburn, Corey Bell, Nicholas Scott, Colette Gallagher. All of these people have worked really hard, in spite of the red tape that the former government have overlaid, to find a way to get out there and work with local community groups and charities and run some great functions and raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it would be remiss of me particularly not to acknowledge Cole Torrington, one of the most outstanding volunteers you'll ever meet on the Gold Coast, someone who was patient and persistent and sat with all these other school groups and charity groups and walked them through the complications, who coordinated the appeals and organised the raffle tickets and the prizes and all the other things, and then sat out the front of Harvey Norman Bundle nearly every Saturday for the last 8 years and Sunday selling tickets to raise money for some of these groups. And of course Karen Phillips I need to mention too, who's one of the board members. It's actually her 50th birthday today. It's all over Facebook and Twitter. It's the new 40 apparently. She doesn't seem to be too concerned about us knowing her age, but Karen, through the Early Risers events, has raised some $1 million or more for Gold Coast charity. And it's these sorts of people that these changes to the legislation will help. It's these sorts of people who will benefit as they go out there and roll up their sleeves with a genuine desire to make a real difference. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's kind of ironic that our colleagues across the chamber, who love to beat their chests about the battlers and the workers, have done so much to make it difficult for people and for community groups to help themselves. You know, I'm just surprised because I'm not sure they really get the concept of community, because community is actually about giving back. And we need to have legislation that gets out of the way of community and makes it easier for these people to continue the work and achieve great things for the many community groups, schools and sporting clubs in society. Our job as a government is to get out of the way and to encourage community, to foster a society where people can get involved without onerous burdens. Our job is to encourage initiative and to release our thousands of community organisations to do what they do best. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is great legislation. It's not just good for the many small charity groups and organisations out there, it's also good for small business. It's great for tourism, it's good for the events industry, and more importantly, it's very good for our communities. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to stand here tonight in the House and commend this bill to the House. I congratulate the Attorney-General on the excellent work that he's done in drafting these changes, and I also congratulate the committee for their work in reviewing the legislation. I commend this bill to the House.